Welcome to another episode, a special episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 3, Episode 3, the Ayahuasca Supercast. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, and even psychedelic drugs used for medicinal purposes, where we will take it all very, very seriously, but not too seriously. Several people have commented on these episodes recounting my evenings with Mother Ayahuasca, and a few of them have said, "Oh, I didn't know there was another episode." When I first recorded these episodes, it was, I would say, traumatic, and I didn't record them in sequence. I had a week off between each one of the recordings so I could process what had happened. I went over my notes, and yes, I did take notes while I was in these journeys. So although I recorded all of the experiences, they weren't sequential. Several people have commented, "Oh, I listened to evening 1 or evening 3. I listened to evening 2 and 3. I listened to evening 3 and 4. Because they weren't sequential, many people didn't listen to all 4 of the episodes detailing each of the evenings that I spent with Mother Ayahuasca. High time for a supercast. Might as well put them all together so that they're in one space that people can go back, and although they may not listen to the episode in one fell swoop, it's going to be well in excess of 2 hours. It is at least in one place where any individual listener can go back and pick up where they left off in order to have the entire experience, the context of the beginning all the way to the end. Thank you so much to all of my loyal supporters. Those of you that listen every week, please like, subscribe, give it thumbs up, reviews, 5 stars, send it to the friends far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. Please support the podcast if you enjoy it. It would really help me out. I do have lofty goals and not enough time or money to meet them at this point, hence why there is not any video. Any monetary support that you could provide would help in that regard. Enough begging, let's get to the tripping.
Act 1, My First Night with Mother Ayahuasca, from Season 1, Episode 29, originally aired September 18th, 2021.
As I explained in previous podcast episodes, namely Episode 26, but some in Episode 27, I went to Costa Rica. I spent time in Costa Rica on vacation, and in my attempt to return, I tested positive for COVID and then had to quarantine there for what was another 8 days. While I was in Costa Rica, I met Mother Ayahuasca. I went to a resort in Costa Rica, of which there are many, that has what is called medicine ceremony, and I drank ayahuasca. Because of the stigma around drugs in general in the United States, I did not tell many people that I had the intention of doing this while I went to Costa Rica. Quick tangent. Yes, everyone who's listening to this podcast, everyone who might listen to this podcast, is in some way, shape, or form taking some kind of drug, prescription or otherwise. This fantasy, this dream that we're living, that somehow that company in that big white building sending these little white pills to doctors in their little white lab coats, having that doctor prescribe to you the drug on a little white prescription pad, that somehow this sanitizes the fact that we're all a bunch of drug addicts. It is our collective cognitive dissonance, is it not, dear listener? Without it, the crack epidemic, the methamphetamine epidemic, and now the opioid epidemic, well, it just couldn't exist. There isn't enough space for these things to exist unless we create it. Tangent concluded. Curious about ayahuasca, wanted to go through the medicine ceremony, but given its illegality in the United States, couldn't really find a place to do so. If you inquire, dear listener, if you try to find a ceremony in the continental United States, often it is done in very secretive undertones. There are a number of churches that claim exemptions that have been upheld by the United States Supreme Court, that ayahuasca is part of a medicine ceremony which is part of their spiritual ritual. Shaman who actually conduct the ceremony are akin to a priest or a pastor or reverend. I think one of the main issues is the fact that many of the people who actually want to go through ceremony do not want to be participants, adherents, congregants, members of a church. Although it is certainly spiritual practice, someone desiring of going through ceremony may not want to go through the formality of actually becoming a public member, a disclosed member of a church in order to do so. Now, in Central America, in South America, and even in North America, in the country of Mexico, ayahuasca ceremonies are legal. They are actually regulated in many of these countries that allow for ayahuasca ceremonies to be conducted, but they are legal. Accordingly, you get a number of Westerners being from North America, from Britain and Europe, from the land down under in Australia. You get a number of Westerners that will gravitate towards these places in order to go through, in order to have this ritual, this ceremony with Mother Ayahuasca. Costa Rica in particular has a number of resorts that actually market and advertise a resort experience, a resort lifestyle, while also having ceremony, a spiritual experience in ceremony with Mother Ayahuasca. Now, many of you, when you hear me refer to ayahuasca as Mother Ayahuasca, given that most of you know me, right? This podcast hasn't reached the kind of circulation, hasn't reached the kind of distribution where most of the people who are listening don't already know me. You may hear me say that and say to yourself, that shit drove him crazy. What is this hippie bullshit? What the hell is he talking about? I will discuss at length those elements of the ayahuasca ceremony, what I think you could refer to as the lifestyle elements surrounding ayahuasca practice, the ceremony. But it is very clear why it is referred to as Mother Ayahuasca. Once you go through the ceremony, it is apparent. Ayahuasca gives you exactly what you need. It doesn't give you what you want. Like any real, like any true, like any supportive parent, it gives you what you need. It doesn't give you what you want. That epiphany alone, that realization alone, having gone through it, having come to that place, is the reason why I refer to it as Mother Ayahuasca. I got exactly what I needed, which was nothing like I expected, and, frankly, nothing like I had wanted when I went to do this. You may be inquiring, dear listener, well, where did you go? The resort was called Rhythmia, Rythmia. Well, we are spellbound, says the audience. Tell us more. It was a beautiful place and a beautiful location, but for the sake of this podcast and all the things that I want to get to, consult your local Google machine. Your Google machine will not disappoint you. I think this very podcast, the things that we will discuss, will be a testament to, will be an endorsement of Rhythmia as a vacation destination and as a spiritual destination. So the next question you may have is, why? What motivated you to want to do this? The universe is strange, dear listener. The universe is strange. Over the course of the last 6, maybe 8 months, I can't tell you how many different references to ayahuasca I had presented to me in popular culture, in the media, from contemporaries, from colleagues, from friends. One of the things that put me over the top was a podcast between Jocko Willink and Dakota Meyer. If you don't know who these two individuals are, Jocko was a Navy SEAL. He was a team leader. I don't know off the top of my head, or by way of reference, what his rank was, but he was in senior leadership positions with the Navy SEALs. He has a number of books about leadership. He gives lectures. He goes and works with major organizations, major corporations with regard to leadership, and he has a podcast. Dakota Meyer is a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient for conduct, for actions, for bravery in Afghanistan. In that podcast, Meyer discusses the actions that he took on the fateful day where he was involved in a massive firefight with the Taliban, but he also goes into detail about post-traumatic stress disorder, the things that he's gone through after having circulated back to the world and trying to now live what any one of us would call a normal life. In that podcast, he speaks of having gone to Mexico to take a spiritual journey under the influence of dimethyltryptamine. Dimethyltryptamine, you say? What is that? Commonly referred to as DMT, it is the active psychoactive ingredient in ayahuasca. Meyer speaks at length about not only the process, but his personal experience with the process and the fact that in many ways he made more progress in a 48 to 72 hour period having taken DMT than he had in 10 years of therapy. The two discuss at length the fact that a number of servicemen have gone to foreign countries to go through an ayahuasca ceremony to deal, to manage, to alleviate, if not remove, post-traumatic stress disorder. It all comes back to a simple concept that it is a spiritual journey inside oneself. So you are going to be forced to meet, if not confront, the true you, the real you. 5 years ago, I would have thought this is some hippie bullshit and there's no way that I'd want to participate in it. But as of late, I have been challenging myself. This podcast is a very testament to as much. I have been challenging myself, examining the way that I look at the world. That started, of course, with my loyalty to these sports franchises, but it certainly bleeds over to politics. It certainly bleeds over to religion. It certainly bleeds over to social issues. And this journey, this part of my examination became very attractive to me. Plus, I'd never been to Costa Rica. That was something that I had an intention of doing. And if I could kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, more the better. So to conclude this first part of the segment, what is ayahuasca? What happens? What are you actually doing? Ayahuasca is a root. It grows in, I believe, South America exclusively, but there may be roots in Central America. Like with any other drug, it is grown in one area of the world and it's exported to others. But the long and short of it, it's a root. You take that root, you mash it up real good, and you boil it. The end product, I've heard it referred to as a tea, but basically it's this dark elixir. It has the consistency of like a Robitussin, perhaps a Robitussin times 2. And yes, they call it Mother Ayahuasca, and probably for good reason, because it tastes like Mother Earth. It tastes like dirt. And not a short dirt taste. It has a long aftertaste. It's a combination of tastes that I can't quite describe, and frankly, I don't want to, because I start having recollections of the actual taste, and it's not good. So you drink it down. What then? The shaman who perform these ceremonies do not hide the ball. They're very honest. They're very frank. I found it somewhat interesting that I don't think that frankness translates to the media, the marketing for these ceremonies. But the shaman, they are filled with truth and light. And the truth is, you're going to purge. Purge, you say. Purge, you ask. What does that exactly mean? Whether it be through sweat, whether it be through shivers or shaking, whether it be through vomiting, whether it be through defecating, you are going to purge. There are things, dear listener, that we are all hanging on to. Yes, I know that you're hanging on to these things. I'm hanging on to them as well, or I was. But these things are energy trapped in your body. They can be shame, they can be guilt, fear, anger, doubt. But these things are a part of you. You are hanging on to them. And frankly, the shamans, again, very forthright, very frank. They are not necessarily a bad thing, or at least they weren't a bad thing when you developed those emotions and you operated under those emotions in order to get through an experience in your life, in order to comport yourself to the parameters that you were operating under at some point in your life. Often, what we refer to as these negative emotions are developed when? Think about it, dear listener. When you're a child, when you're growing up. Harken back to the old Shakespeare quote from the eternal Hamlet, "Nothing is good or bad, only thinking makes it so." At the time you developed shame, at the time I developed shame, it may have been in service of our growth and advancement as adolescents, as young children. Unfortunately, that shame, it still lingers. You still hold on to it. I still hold on to it. As I'm going to discuss in depth later on in this very podcast, in another segment, no one teaches you shame and then gives you the manual on how to operate under shame. When do you start to feel shame? When can you stop feeling shame? When should you apply shame to a situation? When is shame inapplicable? Again, very often we are taught these things. We could be taught these types of emotions, shame, guilt, doubt, when we're 2 years old, when we're 3 years old, when we are 4 years old, and we use those emotions to operate within the family paradigm that we find ourselves in. When your parent, when your sibling, when your grandparent taught you these emotions, did they give you any kind of guidance? Was there any kind of manual? No. You were taught these things, and then you were allowed to operate with this as part of your toolbox with no guidance whatsoever. I have been around children. I do not personally have any. I have been around children. You give a child a 32-ounce glass of water, what do you expect to happen? That water's going to hit the floor, isn't it? You don't trust that child to have a 32-ounce glass of water because you were afraid that child is not responsible enough to make the appropriate decisions consistent with that water simply going into the child's mouth. Yet none of us have any reservation about teaching that child guilt and then letting them go. You did something, you should feel guilt. Once you feel guilt, I'll feel justified as a parent, as an authority figure, and you can just go about your day with the application or the inner-application of guilt from here on out. Do you understand what I'm saying to you, dear listener? You never knew what shame was until it was taught to you. You never knew what guilt was until it was taught to you. You didn't come to some understanding of it. Someone taught you how to do it. And again, within the confines, within the parameters that you were living in at the time, it may have been quite an asset. Is it an asset to you today? Be honest, dear listener. Is it an asset to you today? Are you still hanging on to it? Are you still applying it? I think it's safe to say, are you still misapplying it? And are you wrestling with the consequences of continuing to do so? I'm not afraid to sit here and admit to you, of course, I do wrestle with these things. And I am done wrestling with them. They are tools that no longer serve me, and I wanted to adopt a new tool set. I wanted to figure out how I could start working in service of myself instead of working against myself. Mother Ayahuasca, here I come. Okay, you say, dear listener, but what does it do to you physically? What are you actually going through? You are purging these emotions. You are purging out all of these repressed emotions. And to the extent that you have resistance to doing so, you go through a more violent purge. That is the one thing that I can say here, sitting here today. This is uniform among people who go through an ayahuasca ceremony. Outside of the purge, the experience is specific to you. No two people are really going to say, I had the exact same experience. There are specific similar manifestations. In other words, people will say, I had a scenario that played out very similarly. I saw the same thing, but I saw it in this context. I saw it under this type of vision, under these circumstances. Again, Mother Ayahuasca gives you what you need, not what you want. So there are some consistencies, but it's always going to be specific to you. There were people who literally slept through most of the ceremony. There were people who laughed through a considerable part of the ceremony. There are people who said, nothing's really happening. I'm not getting any kind of reaction. There are people who said, it was the most beautiful experience I'd ever had in my entire life. Although there will be consistencies, none of us have the same exact life experience. All of us are unique and we have unique life experiences. Therefore, our relationship with the ceremony, our relationship with Mother Ayahuasca is going to be unique. And that leads me to the next segment. You are likely sitting there, dear listener, asking, get to it, man. What happened to you? Ask, and ye shall receive.
Act 2. I'm totally tripping balls.
As I stated in the first act of this very podcast, the Mother Ayahuasca has a different journey for each person. Not everyone's going to have the same experience. Well, you may ask, dear listener, what was your experience? In the immortal words of Ike Bravlosky from South Park,
I'm totally tripping balls. I'm totally tripping balls.
That's right. Mother Ayahuasca had a strong hallucinatory effect upon me. I was tripping balls. But before I go into detail about my experience, understand that leading up to the ceremony, you have an opportunity to speak to, work with shaman and other people who are going to be involved in that ceremony. And what they tell you is that you should go into the ceremony with intentions. Be intentional. Why are you there? What do you hope to discover? Naturally, as more experienced practitioners, as people who have been with Mother Ayahuasca many times, they have numerous suggestions for you. But really, what they want you to do is focus. So it boils down to two things, particularly for the novice, such as myself. What are those two things? First and foremost, you ask, show me who I have become. This is a powerful intention. This is a powerful statement. Within that intention, within that statement, you are going to experience a number of things. And these come down to what? Thoughts and feelings. It's the same thing that we go through every day. What are your thoughts and what are your feelings? And during your journey, during your experience, you ask yourself, when have I thought this thought before? When have I felt this feeling before? Then you push deeper. And this is a very important part of the ceremony, of the process. You are going to you will have the inclination to resist and then to back away, to basically run away. Those more experienced, those more wise will recommend to you, don't run away, run towards it. Move towards it. Move towards the thought. Move towards the feeling. As you are moving into the thought, as you are moving towards the feeling, ask yourself, when was the first time I ever thought this? When was the first time I ever felt this way? Folks, Mother Ayahuasca doesn't disappoint. Again, Mother Ayahuasca gives you what you need, exactly what you need. Is that what you want? Is that what you expect? No. No, it isn't. So going into the ceremony, my intention was simply, show me who I have become. Within that intention, I thought to myself, prior to the ceremony beginning, I will simply ask, when have I thought these thoughts before? When have I felt these feelings before? And deeper into that, when did I first? Let me stress, when did I first think like this? When did I have these thoughts originally? When did I first feel like this? When did I have these feelings originally? Some of you listening to this may already be putting the pieces together. Many of our thoughts, many of our feelings are not developed when we are teenagers, when we are preteens. They are developed when we are what? Infants. Maybe 2, 3, 4 years old. These foundations are just that. These are the foundations that have led you to the person that you've become today. With but a simple and yet so powerful intention, I entered my first ceremony. Hey, show me, Mother Ayahuasca, who I have become. And with the tool set of when did I first think this way, when did I first feel this way, I set off. Now, for the hyper-practical amongst you, it's not a very complicated process. You go up to a shaman, you give them a cup, they pour a liquid into the cup. You drink said liquid. You then go lie down, sit down, and you begin the journey. For many, there is a second tendering, there is a second cup of Mother Ayahuasca. So you will go up for a second cup. For some, they may actually have a third or fourth cup. Again, it is your journey. It is your experience. You are unique, you are an individual, and you have to take that journey on your own. There is no right or wrong to be gleaned from whether or not you need but one cup or whether you have to have 4 cups. For my part, I did in fact have a second cup. After my second cup, both the purge and the hallucinatory experience began. I can sum up the purge very quickly. Traumatic. I don't need to go into great detail, but I did, in fact, sweat harder than I've probably ever sweat in my life, and I did not throw up. Not once. Not once over my entire experience did I ever throw up. But, dear listener, I did purge. It's coming out of your mouth or it's coming out of your anus. But you will purge, dear listener. You will purge. As I became more aware of Mother Ayahuasca holding my hand, taking me on this journey, I saw what is a honeycomb that permeates every living and non-living thing. To repeat, for the sake of clarity, I saw a honeycomb that permeates every living and non-living thing. Everything gives off a vibration and is energy, even if that energy is so slowed down that in our conscious state, we see these inanimate objects as what? As a floor, as a chair, as a table. They are still made up of energy. They are still made up of atoms, and they still resonate and have a vibration. You, dear listener, have a much different vibration because not only are you energy, but you are energy in motion. Your energy, your vibration actually permeates out into this honeycomb and is then absorbed by all other matter. You, dear listener, have said this numerous times. You walk into a room, you can feel whether or not it is jubilant, whether the people in that room are happy, or you can feel whether or not it is sad or it is angry. This whole ghost hunter thing that I still laugh at, where you've got these idiots who run around on the Discovery Channel or whatever channel will put these nonsensical jokers on, and what do they always say when they walk into these supposed haunted houses? That you can feel the cold, that you can feel the trepidation, that you can feel these spirits. Whether consciously or unconsciously, these grifters are tapping into something that is real. I saw this. Our thoughts and our feelings are energy that actually project out of us into this honeycomb. To describe it to you, dear listener, it's like throwing a rock into a pond and then watching the waves from that rock reverberate in a 360-degree vibration. All of you have seen that. This is different. It's not 360 degrees of vibration in 2 dimensions. It's in 3 dimensions. It permeates out into all of time and space in 3 dimensions. Here is where I had to hang onto the ground in order to keep myself from falling off the face of the planet. Not only are our thoughts and our energy, these vibrations, permeating into this honeycomb, into the universe, I could see these things as a vibration, as a wave. It comes back to you. It comes back to the people in your immediate surroundings. It can come back to people all over the world. It comes back to matter, whether animate or inanimate. Now, I've heard anecdotally in popular culture, from people, the media, what have you, people go on these psychedelic trips and they'll say things to the effect of, man, the universe, it's alive. And I have to do that falsetto voice because I'm the guy who would hear something like that and say, shut the hell up, hippie. But seeing this vibration being emitted by people and then going out into the universe, but also having it come back, it looked like that honeycomb was breathing. That's right, dear listener. That honeycomb was breathing with the vibration of not only animate, not only living energy, but with inanimate energy. The universe is in fact alive. Quite simply, as I was thinking, as I was feeling, I became aware that all of the negative emotions, all of the negative thoughts that I have permeate out into the universe, and what happens? It reverberates back to me. When I'm thinking positive thoughts, when I am having positive feelings, it permeates out into the universe and it comes back to me. I will touch on this more in the next act, but we are, in fact, all creators. The Bible, the Torah, the Quran, the Buddhists, the Hindus. This concept is universal, that we are all creators, because, dear listener, it's true. In addition, another concept that is consistent amongst Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, the universe, particularly as it has been explained through your subconscious mind, basically the receiver, the transmitter that recognizes, deciphers this energy, these vibrations, it's literal. It is literal. It doesn't understand nuance. It doesn't understand sarcasm. It doesn't understand subtlety. What you say, what you focus on, it is transmitted and it comes back to you. A great example of this, and I actually thought this and experienced this, is when people say, and I believe that they do so rhetorically, oh, I would just die if. I would just die if Alabama wins another national championship. As an aside, I hope none of you are actually saying this, A, because the universe does take this literally, and B, did you see Alabama play the last couple of weeks? The kids look primed for another title run. But when you say, I would just die if, that vibration, that energy is actually dark. It's actually negative. I could see it transmitting a dark vibration, a dark energy out into the universe, out into this honeycomb. That was an epiphany for me because I am still struggling with the use of language, my use of language. I consider myself one with witty repartee, witty banter. This very podcast, when I created it, was one of satire, where I was questioning, through a satirical take, my own fandom in sports, politics, religion, my own fealty to these things. Although many of you, I believe, appreciate that wit, that banter, a satirical look at different issues, whether they be sports related, whether they be in the realm of politics or social issues or religion. The universe doesn't get it. And because that has been so much a part of the way I have lived, of the way that I've created the language that I use, of the way I communicate with other people, it created a lot of resistance in me to what I was seeing, to what I was actually seeing. I am still wrestling with it to this day. So, you may ask, in the throes of this purge, in the throes of this hallucinogenic state, what did you realize? What insights were revealed? What epiphany did you have? To quickly refresh, my intention going in was, Mother Ayahuasca, show me who I have become. And then within that, when do I have these thoughts? When do I have these emotions? And when did I first have these thoughts? When did I first have these emotions? After I surrendered and accepted what I was seeing, I was able to then go back to remember my intention is to discover who I have become. I asked for this to be shown, and it was. Remember, dear listener, Mother Ayahuasca gives you what you need, not what you want, not what you expect.
Act 3 My Inner Child.
I have read The Undiscovered Self by Carl Jung. The way that he writes, the way that his theories are presented, the concept of the shadow, the concept of the inner child, it made a lot of sense. I have read criticisms of this book from modern practitioners, psychiatrists, psychologists, that its presentation is so dry that it is almost formulaic. It is written as a manual for practitioners, in a sense, as much as it is written to explain and or advocate for the theories that Jung had come up with. I've read more modern interpretations of the inner child that make me want to punch people in the face. These tomes are more in tune with one's feelings. And although I believed as I read them that they were written with sincerity, that they were written authentically, the concepts, the way that they were presented, did not appeal to me. I have read You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. I have read Embrace Your Inner Critic by the Stones, the husband and wife team. It was hard for me to adopt any of the practice, any of the recommendations made in these books because of its pure, unadulterated gushing. Just that gushing, that cream hose of gush. Hug your inner child. Caress your inner child. Encourage your inner child. Love your inner child. You read enough of this and you just want to punch somebody in the throat. a natural, rational, reasonable reaction. Doesn't appeal to me on these sports networks where you see people fawning all over their favorite team, and it doesn't appeal to me in terms of self-help. Fast forward to me sitting in a room with a bunch of other people, and the lecture is about your inner child in anticipation of going and doing an ayahuasca ceremony. Yes, dear listener, I said to myself more than once, what the fuck have I gotten myself into? Fast forward again, no more than 5 or 6 hours later, in the midst of me tripping my balls off. Now, I've wrestled with how I'm going to present what happened, what I actually experienced. Some of the things that I saw, that I witnessed, were so powerful that I actually took notes in the midst of this ceremony, in the throes of Mother Ayahuasca. This is not very legible text. If I'm going to criticize the universe, if I'm going to write a letter to Mother Ayahuasca, she didn't help me much in the penmanship. I have decided to keep the particulars to myself, but to explain, if you ask, you shall receive, and as many people who I went through this ceremony with attested to, we saw ourselves as children. In my experience, I was not me as a child. I was actually witnessing myself as a third party, as an observer, as a child. Immediately, all of this resistance that I had to this inner child therapy, into this inner child theorem, it immediately evaporated. I saw myself as that 2-year-old, as that 3-year-old, and I was immediately struck by how innocent and ignorant I was as that 2-year-old, as that 3-year-old. I was, as all 2-year-olds are, as all 3-year-olds are, a blank slate. And I want to be clear about the words that I'm using. You are innocent as a child. I was innocent as a child, but that innocence is a product of ignorance. You just don't know. The entire world is a spectacle to you, is a wonderment to you. This fact, this very simple truth, is extremely hard for us to remember. Then you begin to develop a sense of yourself as you start to discover the world. But as I witnessed with my own 2 eyes during this experience, Mother Ayahuasca showing me events that transpired that helped shape who I was. You come into this life, dear listener, with the ability, and I mean it when I say it, the ability to experience joy, laughter, wonderment, a sense of awe. You do not need to be taught. There is no instruction for you to actually experience these emotions. You also inherently have a sense of fear. This is hardwired into who you are. But you do not have an emotional radar. You do not have an inner sense of what? Shame and guilt. As I endeavor to do in these podcasts, Act 1, Act 2, yes, it will correlate into Act 3. Episode 2, Episode 10, hopefully it correlates into the presentation for later podcasts. There is a method to the madness. So let's go back a bit. What did I say? I had an intention, and then I had the layers of that intention. Show me who I've become, and then show me when I first thought certain thoughts, when I first felt certain emotions. And I saw myself as a 2-year-old, as a 3-year-old, as a 4-year-old, interacting with different authority figures in my life and learning shame and learning guilt. As I stated in Act 1, was I then given the shame manual? Was I then given the guilt instructions? No, how was I taught these emotions? While engaging in some act, an authority figure reprimanded young Patrick, but as I saw it happening, it was not in a caring, a loving, a kind way. It was in my mind, as an adult, it was in my mind undignified. These were authority figures that were projecting their own shame and their own guilt onto a 2-year-old, onto a 3-year-old, onto a 4-year-old. I can't stress this enough, dear listener. It was undignified. Now, if I was able to take that mental movie and actually project it out, to record it and then present it to those individuals, I can practically guarantee you that they would not remember that it happened that way. And to be frank, I can't attest that it truly happened that way. This is something that I saw as a vision during an ayahuasca ceremony. Mother Ayahuasca revealing these things to me. But folks, I'm here to tell you, it happened that way. They did what they did. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I actually wanted to go over to that 2-year-old, to that 3-year-old, to that 4-year-old, and put my arms around him and hug him. All of those things that I read that really disgusted me, that I could not embrace, in that moment, I appreciated them. I appreciated what Louise Hay was trying to communicate. I appreciated what the Stones were trying to communicate. And then something else hit me. And this hit me like a ton of bricks as well. You need shame and guilt to operate within the nuclear family that you are in when you were a child, to operate within the school dynamic that you were in when you were a child, to help you develop a sense of right and wrong. And let me give you an example that came to me in an epiphany as to how this operates. The kid and the cookie jar. You've all heard the analogy, right? Parent tells child, you don't get any cookies now. Child goes and gets a cookie. Parent catches child with hand in the cookie jar. I've had friends talk about the things that they've caught their children doing and thinking, what the hell were these kids thinking in doing that after I had told them not to, and doing it in such a way where there was no way that we weren't, as parents, going to catch them. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks, and it may very well be hitting you as well, dear listener. The 2-year-old, the 3-year-old, the 4-year-old, the 5-year-old. They're not stupid. They are so innocent that they are ignorant of these consequences. They're ignorant of the guilt that they should feel, of the shame that they should feel, because it's not hardwired into them to feel it. You have to teach it to them. And that has to be the hardest thing in the world for an authority figure, for a parent. And in my situation, watching me have to learn through the things that happened to me about shame, about guilt, I actually felt empathy for those authority figures. No one gave me a manual. No one gave me instructions. But you know what? No one gave them a manual. No one gave them instructions. And they didn't know any better than to project their own shame and their own guilt onto a child as a method for teaching that child about shame, about guilt. And then the next epiphany. Oh my God, I'm doing the same thing as an adult, projecting out shame and guilt. And it may manifest in some other way, but it's nothing more than shame and it's nothing more than guilt. Because, dear listener, because there is no manual, there are no instructions, while shame and guilt serve a very important purpose for you as you are a child growing up, you don't know when A, to apply shame, to apply guilt, and B, you don't know when to turn it off. So while you need to use these tools, they are part of your toolbox as you were growing up. You don't need them as an adult to the extent that you needed them when you were a child, when you were 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. But they are just as much a part of your psychological or your emotional toolbox into your preteens, into your teens, into your 20s, 30s, your 40s. You use them for the rest of your life, even though as tools, they are no longer serving you. These are the things that I actually saw in these visions. I had these epiphanies. Suffice to say, as I was seeing the things that I was seeing, as I was feeling the things that I was feeling, as I was going through the throes of Mother Ayahuasca working her way through my body, I was also tripping balls. Harken back, dear listener, 4 or 5 hours before the ceremony began. The shaman advised, recommended, when you are in the throes, when there are things that you are confronting, do you run from it or do you run to it? Run into it. Run toward it. Dear listener, as hard as that may present to you listening to this podcast, sitting in a car, sitting in an office, on an exercise bike, in a gym, wherever you may be, let me tell you something. It is infinitely harder to work into your fear, to work into anxiety, to work into any of the emotions that you're feeling when you're tripping your balls off in a foreign country than it is when you're sitting in the seat of your car. But as many of you who know me understand, my carefree, it attitude, I went into it. I went toward it. What did I tell you earlier, dear listener? I did not vomit one time. Not once. But there were 2 gods at work that evening. One, the maker of the universe, the mother, infinite intelligence, I am, Allah, Jehovah, God, Yahweh, whatever label you want to give it. The second god at work that evening was the porcelain god. Your sturdy, take it for granted every single day, run-of-the-mill toilet. When I went into the emotion, when I ran to it instead of from it, I had, well, let's just say, an urge. And I had no other choice but to satisfy that urge, which is in fact a purge. Yes, a purge. I went and I sat on that toilet, and I actually heard in my head, do you want to let it all go? Do you want to just release it? I said, yes, I do. And then I immediately regretted that because, oh, did I release. The releasing was such, the purging was such, that it was actually an exhausting endeavor. I hate to spoil the ending for you, dear listener, but I survived. I felt both lighter and enlightened. No longer holding on to the things that no longer serve me. I laid my head down on the pillow that night and slept like a baby.
Act 2, My Second Evening with Mother Ayahuasca, from Season 1, Episode 31, originally aired October 3rd, 2021.
I woke up the morning after the first night with Mother Ayahuasca. I was still tripping. It was an amazing and yet terrifying feeling because I had the most vivid dreams. I could remember a lot of what I had dreamt, and yet when I woke up, I was still tripping. Even people that I went on the journey with thought that that was quite unusual, wondering how I could fall asleep in that state. Well, I was so exhausted after that first evening that I don't think my body gave a damn what my mental or psychological condition was. The resort I was staying at, they had this juice that you could buy that they mixed. They actually created daily. Yes, my use of clumsy language should indicate to you how little I actually juice. Even though I live in Scottsdale, I'm not running over to the local juice bar. I probably should. How stupid am I not to take advantage of that? There's probably, at any given time, 50 single women that can put to shame the top 10 Instagram models. Note to self, go to Juice Bar in Scottsdale. Where was I? Juice in Costa Rica. So you go to this area of the resort and you get yourself a juice. I did this and I immediately snapped into this reality, snapped into this plane of existence. Still had a little bit of the feeling in me. I bring this up only because I think part of the scientific, part of the chemical reaction that your body has to ayahuasca, it's involved with water. It's governed by water. You were advised numerous times, and I believe I made mention of this in episode 29, after you've had the ayahuasca, after you've drank the ayahuasca, you are now with Mother Ayahuasca. You are advised prior to, and if any of the shamans see you attempting, do not drink water. Certainly do not drink anything other than water, but do not drink water. And if you really want to go to hell and back, eat something. So for hours on end, and when I say hours on end, that could be 6, 8, 10 hours, you aren't drinking any water. Given the level of purge that people go through, you can see that the water, or lack thereof, multiplied by the purge, you have yourself some healthy dehydration. So part of the psychedelic effect, part of the way your body reacts in the throes of Mother Ayahuasca, it's dehydration. Got the juice in me, got that sugar in me, boom, snap back into this plane of existence. The ceremony for the second night was involving masculine energy. And in preparation for this ceremony, you get a lot of the spiritual, you get a lot of the metaphysical interpretations, lessons on what masculine energy actually means. Of course, both masculine and feminine energy are felt by both genders, are experienced by both genders. Both genders are governed by both of these energies. So my intention going into that ceremony, I thought, this is going to be right up my alley. I'm going to be somewhat aggressive, somewhat ambitious about what my intentions are because I was optimistic about that ceremony. Again, you were guided as to what your potential intentions are, and my intentions for that evening were merge me with my soul at all costs and heal my heart. To give you, dear listener, some context with regard to those intentions, based on some of the things that I had experienced the night before, the first night, the things that I saw of myself and how I had been shaped as a child into the preteen that I was, how I was shaped as a preteen into the teenager I was, how I was shaped as a teenager into the young adult I was, how I was shaped as a young adult into the adult I am today. My intention was to scrape away a lot of the things that had shaped me into who I am today and to merge back with the person that I was when I was kicking around on a tricycle. And rather than resent myself or any of the people who had helped turn me into the adult I am today, just let all that go. Heal your heart, forgive, move on. Ceremony begins and there's clearly a different vibe from the first night. It is a more masculine energy. The music, the way the ceremony is progressing, particularly some of the dances that the shaman are engaged in, very masculine energy. Let me illustrate as much by way of one of the songs. Fast forward to the next day, many of the people in what we would call an immediate post-ceremony integration were discussing the music, and one song in particular. I vibrated very well. My frequency was very in tune with this song. I was an outlier. Just to put it in context, I'm back into the throes of Mother Ayahuasca at this point. I am, again, tripping balls. The music begins to escalate, and one of the songs is very primal, is very violent. It reminded me specifically of the scene in Full Metal Jacket when they're approaching the city of Wei and the Marines have to gradually march through those obliterated city streets up to the buildings where they believe there to be enemy forces. Do you remember that scene, dear listener? Now, I had no concept of time, but in the post-mortem where several people discussed this song, and most their disdain for as much, it seemed to go on for 15, 20 minutes. As opposed to most, I had a completely different reaction. Loved it. Not going to go so far as to say that my dick got hard, but I'm not going to say that the blood didn't have some flow. I'm not going to say that I was completely flaccid. So, perhaps the only one, I was enjoying my moment during this part of the masculine ceremony. Again, back to where I was the night before, I could see this honeycomb. I could see energy all around everything. I could see how thoughts, how feelings can be conveyed, can be projected out into the universe. The first line of thought that I had from my tripping balls, barely legible notes, manifestation, manifesting. Big, lucrative industry, from fortune tellers to self-help gurus, even religious figures in Christianity, in Hinduism and Buddhism. Here's how you manifest everything that you want. Here's the secret. There's a movie, there's a book. The interesting thing to me as I was in this place, as I was sitting with Mother Ayahuasca, it's all true. You can manifest. You can concentrate your feelings and your thoughts on things that you want, and it will be projected out in the universe. It reverberates in a vibration out into the universe, and it starts to come back to you. So what's the epiphany, dear listener? As I said in episode 29, many of the answers that we seek are right in front of us. We're staring at them for not days, not months, not years, not decades, perhaps all of our lives, and we can't see it. People sit in church or at their bedside at night and they pray. People meditate. Maybe it's during yoga. Maybe it's during some other form of exercise, Pilates, running, swimming, maybe dancing. I'm going to manifest what I want and it's going to come to me. Our thoughts are energy. We're projecting this energy out into the universe. The universe will respond. Let me ask you, dear listener, to just engage in the opposite type of exercise. Don't take time to focus on what you want, to try to clear your mind and manifest. Take time to simply observe your thoughts in your day-to-day actions. You wake up, you get out of bed, you start your morning routine, you get into your work routine. What are you thinking? How are you feeling? Many of us in these routines have become so much habit that we're thinking constantly during these routines and we're not even paying attention to the thoughts as we're moving through the routines. I'm sitting here in this room, listening to this music, seeing what I'm seeing and realizing that during many of the routines that I have, I am thinking thoughts and I don't realize how I got to the thought I am thinking when I recognize I am thinking the thought. Listen to me. Think about what I'm saying. I don't recognize how I got to the thought I am thinking until I'm observing the thought that I'm thinking. When you actually scale back, when you actually try to observe, be mindful, notice, how did I get to that thought? Was that the thought that popped into my head that I am now thinking when I am observing my thought? Is that the feeling, is that the emotion that I was experiencing when I realized that I was experiencing the feeling, when I was experiencing the emotion? I know we want to all answer yes. I immediately observe the thoughts that come into my head. I immediately observe the emotions. I immediately observe the feelings. The reality is we don't. We may have 10, 20, 30 different thoughts from the time that we wake up until we're brushing our teeth or coming out of the shower or what have you. We may have an entire stream, a series of thoughts before we recognize we are neck deep in the thought that we're having. We are neck deep in the feeling that we are experiencing, the emotion that we're experiencing. And generally, if we are even being that mindful, which most of us are not, it is not what we want. It's generally playing out a scenario in your head of something that you don't want. A situation involving a spouse, a child, a coworker, a client. In this thought, in this imagination, you're playing out a scenario that's what? That's exactly how you want it to play out? No! Generally, you're having a concern about it being confrontational, about something that you want not happening and how you're going to have to manage it, about the emotions that you're going to experience as you're going through this situation. Anger, frustration, disappointment, doubt. And you may not realize that you've had an entire series of thoughts that have led to that scenario before you even realize you're thinking about this very particular scenario. You see yourself in this scenario not getting what you want. How long do you think that was? Were you doing that for 3 minutes? Were you doing that for 5 minutes? Were you doing that for 20 minutes? From the time you got out of bed until perhaps you're combing your hair, you're shaving. Yes, ladies, I know you shave as well. This is a unisex point that I'm making here. You may have spent easily 20 minutes going through all of these thoughts, all of these emotions, all of these feelings, none of it being particularly what you wanted before you realize this is what you've been doing. How long did you pray in church? How long did you pray before you went to bed? How long were you focused on your run? How long were you focused in yoga? How long were you focused on your drive into work? How long did you focus on what you wanted in these moments that you were taking for yourself to manifest what you wanted versus all the time you spent thinking about things that you didn't want without even realizing how you got there? Do you want to know what I wrote in my notes? Most people manifest, including you, in an amalgam of clusterfuck. Let me repeat. Most people manifest, including you, in an amalgam of clusterfuck. You take 5, you take 10, you take maybe any one of you, take 20 minutes to really focus and concentrate your emotion, your feelings, and in particular your thoughts on what you want. And then for the other 23 hours and 40 minutes of the day, you are in this race of thought, this amalgam of clusterfuck, where generally you are thinking about the things, you are feeling the things, your emotions are consistent with the things that you do not want. So here I am in Costa Rica trying to go through all these layers of myself that have been built up over the course of decades, wondering why, hey, are you in the right place now? Why don't you have more money? Why haven't you reached the zenith of happiness? And then I can see my own thoughts. I can see my own emotions. I can see my own feelings as a transmission out into the universe. And I'm giving myself probably no more a day than 10, 15, 20 minutes of pure positive manifestation. I lock into the rest of my day, and it is an amalgam of clusterfuck. I'm pulled in every direction by not only my mind, but by, in particular, the stimuli that I am confronted with. For all of us, that's namely in our career, but that's also in our own ambition otherwise. The things that we want to do socially, the things that we want to do spiritually. All of these desires create more and more expectation, and more expectation creates more and more opportunity to do what? To think about, to feel all the different possibilities of how these things aren't happening immediately and how they may not be happening anytime soon, and all the scenarios of how you're going to navigate them not happening. I hope the wheel is spinning in your head, dear listener. We sabotage ourselves. The universe in many ways is just a computer, and we are the software. We are the programming. It's reflecting everything that we're giving it. When there's an error as users of computers, think about it. We generally blame the computer. This stupid machine. The computer is just running code. That code is coming from a programmer. So to the extent that we're ever frustrated at the computer, we should be frustrated with the programmer who wrote the software that's executing code poorly. More accurately, we should really be frustrated with the user, because generally it's us that doesn't understand how to execute the code via the programming, and the computer is just doing what we're telling it. The universe is the exact same way. We're giving the universe the code, we're giving the universe the inputs, and it's just giving back to us what we are giving it. After coming to such a realization, I had to take a shit. Mother Ayahuasca's little "you're welcome" for coming to such a realization. As I made offerings to this porcelain goddess, recognizing that many of the triumphs that I had ever had, but mostly the disappointments that I've ever had, were all because of me, I realized that worry was futile. If I could just be more aware, be more mindful, be more focused on what I want versus what I don't want, I don't have to worry about it coming into being. I simply need to focus on the why. The universe will take care of the how. I began to have a sense of trust and a sense of relief that I can't remember the last time I've ever felt, if I've ever felt it at all. Very quickly, that moved into a feeling of pain. Yes, pain. I became hyper aware of not only the offerings that I was making, but I became hyper aware of what everybody else was doing in that moment. Folks, there was some healthy purging going on all around. I don't know that I focused on it in episode 29, but I actually made a note of it, and I'm going to talk about it right here, right now. I have never been exposed to that much pain and suffering. I have been very fortunate in my life. My grandparents lived a very long time. They only recently passed away. Most everyone in my family is not only alive, but they're doing pretty well. Very few of them are exposed or are suffering from a long or chronic illness. Accordingly, I have not heard, not been exposed to the phenomenon of retching. R-E-T-C-H-I-N-G, dear listener. Sitting on this porcelain throne, being someone that really has a hard time vomiting. I am listening, I'm being bombarded, my auditory senses are overwhelmed by a number, I mean plural, a number of people that are in the throes of retching. I was taken by the violence of it. People in the medical profession are probably much more familiar with it, specifically those that have worked in hospitals. But retching can be a terrible, terrible, violent thing to witness, violent thing to hear. In the midst of this, it was overwhelming. I wasn't necessarily feeling all of this pain. In truth, I was feeling a level of relief, given the intensity of what I was doing, the purge that I was having. But at the same time, given what all of these other people were going through, I was experiencing their pain. I felt subjected to their experience. Now, again, I'm tripping my balls off. This is not a pleasant way to be experiencing this psychedelic phenomenon. As we were counseled by a number of people prior to the ceremony, prior to the first ceremony, and again, prior to this ceremony, I began to breathe. I began to focus specifically on my breath. I was attempting to bring myself back to center given what I was experiencing. My breaths became more intense. I began breathing in more deeply and exhaling more deeply. And a funny thing happened, dear listener. I began to feel all of this emotion, all of this pain that was driving people into retching. I was breathing it in and I was exhaling it out and I was expelling it from our collective consciousness. I can't tell you how long this went on, but I can tell you that it actually went on for a while. How do I know that? Because someone actually knocked on the door and asked me if I was okay. I had clearly been in the bathroom long enough where one of the shaman came to the realization that that guy's been gone a long time. Hope he's okay. Let me go check on him. In my mind, as I was experiencing this, I felt that I was both faithfully helping these people and yet trapped by them. I wanted to help expel, to expunge, to purge all of this pain, all of these negative emotions, and yet I felt I could not get out of it. I could not stop this from happening. So my only path was to move forward, was to continue in my breath these deep inhalations, these deep exhalations in order to try to purge all of this negativity. It slowly started to sink into me. This is what empathy feels like. This is what compassion feels like. This is what love feels like. You want to help. You want to see other people have success. You want to feel their joy. But very often, because you have little control over what they're going to do, you have to ride out that roller coaster. You have to ride out all the bumps and bruises. These are emotions that I haven't felt in years. This may come as a shock to you, dear listener, but working in the legal profession, having empathy, having compassion, having love, well, those aren't part of the tool set. These are certainly not requisites necessary to navigate a civil lawsuit. In fact, trying to employ these tools in that process can often be counterproductive. I felt the weight of empathy. I felt the weight of compassion. I felt the weight of love for these people as they were experiencing their purge. There were very successful, wealthy people going through this experience. In that moment, I didn't see them as wealthy, experienced, professional adults. I saw us all as the children that we were going through this pain together. None of us were the same, but we could all share in one thing, this vulnerability. We were all on the same journey with Mother Ayahuasca. And that's when it hit. Merge me with my soul at all costs. Well, what are the costs? You want to feel empathy? You want to feel compassion? You want to feel love? And what do you want from those things? You want what you want. You want what you expect out of them. Hey, isn't this supposed to make me feel good? Hey, isn't this supposed to make me feel rewarded? Hey, shouldn't I be getting a universal pat on the back? The reality is that you have to be in tune with other people's pain, with other people's purging, no matter how ignorant that purge may be, the anger that they're feeling, the frustration that they're feeling, the way that it manifests. It's easy to be empathetic, to be compassionate when you hear somebody retching their guts out, so violent that it contorts their entire body. They lose control. But what about when they're boo-hooing on their Twitter feed? What about when they're in front of you in line somewhere and they're having a tantrum with a cashier? What about when you see them at some political rally and they're waving a sign and acting the fool, pledging fealty to some politician who's going to solve all their problems? Can you? Can you feel that empathy? Can you feel that compassion? Can you feel that love in those moments? I pledged to the universe I could. Boom. Forgive them, forgive yourself, heal your heart. It felt like the collective purge ended. Everything just settled down. The energy in the air settled down. Our collective vibration, the frequency just went lower. The music slowed and then stopped. The room went quiet. For my part, I was able to actually get up off that toilet and go back into the room and sit down. In my tripping balls font, I was able to write this all out while at the same time being immersed in the feeling of empathy, of compassion, of love. Most specifically for all of the people in that room, including myself. So you might ask, you're a completely changed and reformed man. That's not how it works. In fact, it's quite the opposite. As I said in episode 29, what do I have now? I have knowledge. That knowledge means nothing unless I can consistently put it into action, that I can consistently put it into practice, that knowledge can manifest as wisdom. That is what I'm wrestling with now. You come back into the world, and here lies all of the same stimuli that you faced prior to having gone through the spiritual journey with Mother Ayahuasca. I'm not afraid to admit that I now have, from the time that I went on the spiritual journey, sitting with Mother Ayahuasca, and sitting here today, I have significant experience. And what is experience? Experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. I've purged a lot of things, but I haven't quite yet purged the amalgam of clusterfuck. But, dear listener, I am aware of it. I notice it. I am being mindful of it. In that way, I can now better control when that starts to happen. And I will present the challenge to you. I can go back and recount where a thought came into my mind, the number of thoughts that I actually experienced, the thoughts that preceded it, when I got to the thought that I was thinking, when I noticed that I was thinking a thought. That's right. I have a histography. I actually go back and I recount the thoughts to the source thought, and I have then this movie of thoughts that led me from the source thought to where I was when I realized I was thinking. I can focus on that, I can watch it all melt away, and I can go back to either focusing on what I want, or I can remake the movie of those thoughts in my mind. Instead of being subject to the amalgam of clusterfuck, I can rebuild that narrative from thought to thought to thought, having it all comport to what I want. It is as if I am a baby again and I am just learning how to walk. Oh, I stumble. Oh, I fall down. But I pick myself up, I dust myself off, and damn it, I walk again.
Act 3, My Third Evening with Mother Ayahuasca, from Season 1, Episode 33, originally aired October 16th, 2021.
I woke up after my second evening with Mother Ayahuasca, having slept like a baby.
My body felt good. My mind felt good. And like the first night, I had vivid, extraordinary dreams. I woke up in the throes of Mother Ayahuasca, still feeling it. Now, at the resort I was staying, they had a saltwater pool. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to swim in a saltwater pool, but it is fantastic. It's better for you in every way. Better for your skin, better for your mind. So in the throes of Mother Ayahuasca, still tripping a bit, I got myself one of those freshly squeezed juices. I knocked it down in one gulp. It basically shook me or brought me back to this level of consciousness. And then I jumped into that saltwater pool. Felt fantastic. Went about my day, and I would venture to say to you, dear listener, that I was feeling very confident about this entire process. In retrospect, you might even say I was feeling bold. I felt like, up to that point, I felt like I had gotten what I wanted out of the ayahuasca experience. Or, as I've stated numerous times, more apropos, I received what I needed. And yet there were 2 more nights that I had signed up for, and I certainly wasn't going to skip them or otherwise not engage in the process. So I had, at this time, after 2 nights, I had a level of optimism going into the 3rd night. The 3rd night of the ayahuasca ceremony focused on feminine energy. Now, if you've listened to the first 2 segments, if you've listened to the podcast where I address Mother Ayahuasca, what I saw, the nature of who we are, it's all about energy. So saying the words feminine energy, it takes on a very material, it takes on a very biological, 2-dimensional construct. The reality is we all have within us, no matter our biological gender, masculine and feminine energy. Part of this reckoning that I was going through was realizing the extent to which one of these energies may be suppressed for another. And it has nothing to do with your biological gender. There are many women who suppress their feminine energy, and there are many men who suppress their masculine energy. As is explained throughout the course of this process, part of your journey is to discover and realign both your masculine and feminine energies. Again, no matter your biology, no matter your biological gender. I've said it once, and I'm going to say it again. Considering that I know probably every single one of you listening to this podcast, it will come as no surprise to you that I've always favored my masculine energy in suppression of any feminine energy that I possess. This was not something unbeknownst to me going into this feminine energy ceremony. In speaking to one of the shaman before the ceremony, and I should be specific here, she was a Sha woman, I was asking her about how to structure my intentions, and I said to her, and I specifically wrote it down after our conversation, I said to her, I'm the type of person who doesn't identify with feminine energy. And she stopped me right there. And she just said, listen to yourself. Listen to what you're saying. You don't identify with feminine energy if you don't identify with feminine energy. Your own language creates your reality. Ah, I said, okay. Thinking that one little turn of phrase created the wisdom necessary to completely change my ways. Yes, I was feeling confident. I was feeling optimistic. I was feeling bold. So, writing that down, going into this ceremony, identifying with feminine energy, I felt like, I have been someone that doesn't identify with feminine energy, but I'm going to be a different person in the future. As I've discussed in the first 2 segments, you go into these ceremonies with intentions. And because I felt like I had received so much enlightenment in the first two ceremonies, in my first two journeys with Mother Ayahuasca, I had a very open intention for this third ceremony, for this journey into feminine energy. So my intention was simple. I went up to the altar, I approached the shaman, I presented my cup, I got the ayahuasca, I drank the ayahuasca, and I said simply, I am available for what you want to show me. I'm available. I have alluded in the other two segments as to the makeup of not only the shaman, but the participants in this ayahuasca journey. There were probably about 42, 45 of us, and I would say it was 2/3 women, 1/3 men. Probably about 15 men, at least 30 women. The shaman had people helping them, working in service of the group, and many of them were women as well. Once I started to commune with Mother Ayahuasca, once it started to flow through me, the energy of this ceremony, the energy of this environment was completely different. In many ways, it was foreign to me. In many ways, it was immediately challenging to me. How so? I have never been inspired to dance by much of the music that the public, that the peoples would call dance music. It does not inspire me in any way, shape, or form. Much of the music that was being played, and some of it was recorded, some of it was live music. Much of the music that was being played was in service of this feminine ceremony, and the women who were the principal shaman conducting the ceremony were very in tune with this vibration in a physical way. Immediately a lot of dancing. And you'd think in saying dancing that it's graceful, that it's fluid. But I quickly realized that in engaging with feminine energy, part of this process was engaging with the suppression of feminine energy and then feminine energy retaking its power. I hear this all the time in popular culture. I know you have as well, dear listener. It does not matter what biological gender we are. Feminine energy, generally, in the 21st century, as much progress as we have made, it's still suppressed to masculine energy. Many of you who are listening, considering I know most of you, you are professionals. You are dealing with both men and women in professional capacities in a number of different types of industries. I'm not saying anything revolutionary here by noting that many of the women who are very successful, who are in positions of leadership in a professional capacity in a number of industries, have to demonstrate a number of masculine qualities. In one of my favorite television programs of all time, the television program Mad Men, note, if you have not watched it, homework assignment, watch Mad Men. The program begins, season 1, it's in the 1950s in New York City. One of the protagonists in the show, a woman named Peggy Olson, has quite a journey from a secretary all the way up to an executive within the universe of this show. Without too many spoilers, it is clear that you see in the 1950s and into the 1960s, through the eyes of this character, Peggy Olson, how a woman has to wrestle with ambition and then maintaining her feminine energy, maintaining her femininity. Ambition in the environment of the 1950s and the 1960s meant that a woman would have to subrogate her femininity for her masculine energy. She had no other choice. She was literally carving out a space for her to be a part of the professional elite, the executive class. So very quickly I understood that the nature of this ceremony wasn't going to be pink lace, arts and crafts, a purse or shoe collection. The music was not my vibe. And the dancing often became more primal, more violent, more authoritative. It's very hard for me to describe, but I immediately understood the difference between the vibration of what was happening in this feminine ceremony versus the masculine ceremony, in addition to my dissonance. As Mother Ayahuasca began to flow through me, I heard a voice in my head ask me a simple question. Do you want to know what it feels like to be a woman? Do you want to know what it feels like to be a woman? I do not recall a moment of hesitation. I preface this moment with my mental state, my attitude, my mindset for a reason. I was fairly confident. It is not to say that I did not have my challenges during the first two ceremonies. You cannot go through this process with Mother Ayahuasca and not experience challenges. But I was fairly confident about my progress and the outcomes, the revelations, the wisdom from the first two ceremonies. So with little to no consideration, I answered yes. You cannot see this, dear listener, but I have a workbook where I had taken notes from the different ceremonies. And again, as I made reference to in the other two segments, my tripping balls script, it's terrible, but I was compelled, given some of my epiphanies, given these realizations, I was compelled to take notes in real time. It was on this third evening, it was during this ceremony with feminine energy that I took the most notes that I took for any of the ceremonies. And I can reveal to you without a doubt, it was one of the most difficult evenings of my entire life. I was me the entire time, and yet I wasn't me at all. I won't go as far to say that I had an out-of-body experience. That wasn't what was happening. What was happening was I had me, I was me, and yet I had the feeling, I felt like I had female genitalia. I had the emotions, the estrogen flowing through me of a woman. It was both a beautiful and terrifying experience. I didn't see myself in that moment, in that reality, but I'm sure that if I were being recorded in that moment, it would look like I was freaking out. So what happened? What did I experience in this altogether too real mental state? From a feminine perspective, from a female perspective, I felt romance, I felt love, I felt the emotions of being desired, being the center of attention. You have no concept of time. So I have no idea how long I was going through these emotions, but that initial phase of calming myself down, realizing what was happening, and then leaning into the experience, that was actually a beautiful, graceful experience. Being a woman is a beautiful experience. Oh, but how quickly it turned dark. I was soon to discover that being a woman is also a terrible, tragic experience. Namely, because of my gender, because of me. I felt emotions surrounding disappointment, surrounding expectations unfulfilled, unmet. I felt violence, having to bear the brunt of so many masculine inadequacies. Now, to paint a picture of what's going on from a ceremonial standpoint, this entire room that we were in, the shamans would disperse this smoke. When I say disperse, it was a very interesting way they did it. They're taking nothing more than what looks like a common kitchen pot, and it's got some sort of ash or burning ember in it, and it smokes. I mean, it smokes. And they are distributing that smoke by way of what look no more than to be bird feather fans over the course of this room. It has just struck me that I am in my third recording of my ayahuasca experience, and I refer to a room that we're all in. It actually had a ceremonial name. It was called the Maloka. So you're in this Maloka, you're in this building that is ornate, that is ceremonial, and it is filled with smoke. And depending at what point you are in this process, depending on what point you are in this ceremony, there may be music playing. That could be a live band. There are shamans who are actually playing music on instruments. They're damn good. And there could also be recorded music playing. To say that these shamans are damn good, it is the spectrum of music. These people could come to the States and be in any cover band in any city, in any state, and immediately blend in. They can play practically anything. But there are moments when you were going through an experience, the level of intensity of the music is escalating, and based on the density of that smoke being distributed, you may just want to get the hell out of Dodge. When all of what I felt like was generational anger and violence suffered by women started to befall me, I had to get up and get out of there. So I went outside, cleared my head a little bit, went back in and started to attempt to memorialize some of the things that I was experiencing, some of the things that I was feeling. In doing so, I was struck by a strange discomfort that was much more than simply indigestion. Being now in the throes of my third ayahuasca ceremony, I was pretty familiar with the feeling of indigestion. I'd gotten quite comfortable with it to my own chagrin. This was not indigestion. This wasn't simple bloating. It was very quickly that I realized that in my own experience, I felt like I was pregnant. I also realized as I tried to calm myself that I was tripping my balls off. I began to inhale and exhale as deeply as I could. As I just explained, this room we were in, the Maloka, this hall, was filled with smoke. Couldn't handle it. Could not inhale and exhale as deeply as I wanted in light of all this smoke, in light of the way I was feeling, in light of the fact that I was tripping my balls off. I was up, I was out. I had to get outside again. I get outside, I'm going to breathe my way through this. You are reminded over and over again, stay in your breath. You get to a certain place, you are not comfortable, you are experiencing all these negative emotions, stay in your breath. I was experiencing negative emotions for sure. The problem was, I wasn't leaving this paradigm. It struck me like a lightning bolt. You don't get to run from this. You have to run into it. So I began to focus my attention on the feeling of being pregnant. I tried to express as much when I actually got back to my pad, to my pen, but it is the most life-affirming experience that one could ever go through. As any mother will readily tell you, there is no experience, there is no feeling similar to actually creating and growing another human life inside your body. For what I recall was only a brief moment, I had this beautiful, beautiful experience, this beautiful feeling of how special, of how privileged a woman is to be able to create human life. I wanted to live in that experience. I wanted to live that feeling. Now, if you've listened to the other two segments, you know Mother Ayahuasca gives you what you need, not what you want. And that feeling of beauty, that feeling of growth, of creation, it soon gave way to the reality of what a woman goes through for the 9 months that she's actually making that baby. A growing feeling of discomfort to the point where I didn't know whether to sit down or stand up. I didn't know whether or not to lay down on my back or lay down on my side. This sense of unease, it kept growing and growing and growing. And I was probably in that moment, although I don't think I had much interaction with any other human being, an edgy, crotchety, unbearable prick. I can't relate to any experience that I've had as a man that would simulate or that I can analogize to this feeling. You drank too much, gentlemen, and you ate too much. And you weren't 40 years old. You weren't 30 years old. You were in your stupid 22, 21-year-old self, and you continue to drink all that beer. As bloated and as uncomfortable as you've ever been, you can't drink another drink to stave off what you know is coming, which is that hangover. Being pregnant is infinitely worse than that. You knew that you were going to be able to get up the next day, hopefully take a massive dump, go dry out, and maybe if you were one with a heroic constitution, maybe you'd go out drinking the next night, but for the slim like me, you took that next 2 days off. A rough 24 hours. There's no 24-hour stint when you're pregnant. And not only is it bad, but there's no reprieve. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. A significant period of time passed, I know, and a significant number of things happened, which I'm going to keep to myself. But I was approached by one of the shaman who realized I hadn't been back into the Maloka for some time, and when I was discovered, so to speak, I do remember that I was pacing. I could not get comfortable. I could not shake this experience. There are processes that the shaman go through to help calm someone down, and as soon as I had gone through that process, I immediately went back to my pad, my pen, and I began to write. Here's my actual, in my Tripping Balls font, entry into this notebook. Being a woman is frustrating, is uncomfortable, is often undignified, but you don't get to quit. I can be a man and still make space for women. It's okay for women to want to be the center of attention because they so rarely get the opportunity in a genuine way. And then I went to the bathroom and I took, yes, a massive, I purged. I came back to where I was stationed in this Maloka, and there was a song playing, and practically every woman got up and started dancing to this song. I don't know what it was about this song. I don't know what it was about the vibration of what was happening, but I felt it pushing against me. I sat down and I tried to take in what was happening. The music began to escalate. The dancing began to escalate. It became more energetic. It was taking up much more space. I can remember this crescendo, the refrain of this song, and every one of the women in this room, this is 25, 30 women, held hands and began to sing and dance at the same time, in the same rhythm to this song. I felt it as if they collectively had combined and were flexing their feminine energy in aggregate, in a collective, as one. I wrote one simple sentence down on my pad with my pen. There is a majesty to being a woman. Appreciate and give them space to flex. But I can tell you, as someone who could not tell time, who didn't have any concept of time, I felt like I did have a concept of the fact that that song went on for 45 goddamn minutes. Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't have to flex as long at a Mr. Universe contest in order to win than this flex went on during what was, in my mind, this 40-minute song. I kept having this feeling, just get up and walk out. And then I had this other voice in my head saying, stay. Stay. Don't run from it. Run into it. As the music finally ended, as the energy in the room started to slowly de-escalate, I started to become one with myself. I started to feel like myself. And I felt like someone had beaten the living hell out of me. As many of you are aware, for both sport and recreation, to stay in shape and to help release some of the anger that is natural to being a member of the legal community, I box. I go to a boxing gym. I have boxing gloves. I put those boxing gloves on and I punch things. As a younger man, in order to refine my skill set, in order to challenge myself, to test myself, I would spar other human beings. Because of my size and my weight, those other human beings were routinely younger than me. Many of them were in their teens or early 20s. Because young people, in their zeal, do not understand half speed, sometimes these sparring matches turned into what one would call a gym war. The term gym war is not that difficult to decipher. Basically, one person escalates the situation such that the other person has to respond in kind, and before you know it, you've got people going all out at one another in a boxing ring. I only relay that to you, dear listener, to explain that when I say that I felt like I had the hell beaten out of me, I know exactly what it feels like to have the hell beaten out of me. An interesting element to any combat sport is, no matter how good you are, there's always someone out there who can either test your skills or just trump your skills. Sitting in that maloka, it was both a cathartic experience and it was like I had just had the hell beat out of me. I was realigning with feminine energy, whether I liked it or not. Going through that experience, if it were a YouTube video, thumbs down, don't like. But after integrating on it, after reflecting on it, again, it wasn't what I wanted. It was exactly what I needed. All that was left was the fourth and final night of my journey with Mother Ayahuasca.
Act 4, My Final Evening with Mother Ayahuasca, from Season 1, Episode 35, originally aired October 30th, 2021.
I woke up after the third night with Mother Ayahuasca. I did not feel well. Have you ever exercised to the point where afterwards, whether it be working out, running, swimming, something that had both a physical element and an endurance element, afterwards you felt sick? You had just exercised, you had just challenged yourself, but you did so to such an extent, to such an extreme, that afterwards you actually felt sick. That, dear listener, that is how I felt when I woke up after my third night with Mother Ayahuasca. Did not feel well. Felt beat up, felt like I had exercised way too hard, way too vigorously, and actually felt this level of sickness. Consistent with my routine, though, I got up, went and got myself one of these fresh-made, fresh-pressed juices, chugged it down, jumped into the saltwater pool, and I did feel a little better. But I didn't feel much better as I had on the previous mornings. As the day progressed, I realized I was likely not going to feel but so much better. I was not likely to feel energized, enthusiastic, optimistic. At the resort, Rhythmia, they have a place where you can get massages. I had a massage scheduled for the next evening. I moved it up. Smartest decision I ever made. Very relaxing. Went through a Swedish massage. Got my mind right. Thought everything's going to be fine. the evening progresses, we finally get into the Maloka, the hall where we're going to have this ceremony, and it was then that the weight of everything hit me. For the first time since I had chosen to engage in this process, to go to Costa Rica, to stay at this resort, to participate in these ayahuasca ceremonies, I had the twinge of regret. I began to debate in my head, are you really going to go through this again? Not the most harmonious frame of mind to be in anticipation of this ayahuasca ceremony. Now let's talk about this ayahuasca ceremony. This is the fourth night, and each night had a different theme. This theme was not a masculine theme or a feminine theme. This evening, there was a different ayahuasca that was being presented. And at the resort, we had been educated as to the nature of this root, this form of ayahuasca. The Spanish name, and I'll very likely say this wrong, is yahe. I believe it is spelled Y-A-G-E, yahe. Now, we are all adults. The shaman are not coy about the nature of what we are going to experience. Very frankly, explain to us that yahe is a stronger version of the ayahuasca root. In my own words, yahe is the anvil. Yahe is the hard hitter. As much as one might think they experienced sitting with Mother Ayahuasca, these different forms of ayahuasca, one is inclined to believe that they've experienced they've absorbed very powerful medicines. Yahe from Colombia is the hard hitter, is the anvil. As much as any of us were inclined to believe we had already run the gauntlet, yahe is truly a different gauntlet. To illustrate my mental state, my level of reluctance, while this ceremony was going on, there is a quite intricate blessing of the ayahuasca, the blessing of the shaman. It's a very interesting ceremony. It's a beautiful ceremony. I did not watch, for the first time, much of that ceremony on the fourth night. I was actually lying down. I was trying to mentally prepare myself. Frankly, I believe now in retrospect, I was trying to rest, if not take a quick nap, so that I would be more physically, if not mentally prepared for one yahe. As the group was called up to present their cup for the yahe, I sat on my bed. I then laid back down, deciding I'm going to wait. I'm going to be one of the last people to take Mother Ayahuasca in this form, postponing the inevitable, knowing that I was very well going to do it, that I wasn't going to not do it. This was the state of mind that I was in leading into the fourth night, leading into this ceremony. Quick recap, quick refresher. As I explained in the other segments, the other podcasts, documenting my journey with Mother Ayahuasca, you go into these ceremonies. You were provided a number of intentions. You were instructed about how to create these intentions if, in fact, you don't want to use the intentions that are provided to you by the staff, by the shamans. For my part, I had heard someone offer an intention for those that had felt like they had made so much progress already. Where do you go when you have seen who you have become? Where do you go when you merge your soul at all costs? Where do you go when you have healed your heart? The intention offered was, help me forgive the unforgivable. Help me forgive the unforgivable. I will not go into much detail. I will obviously not offer names, but many of the people that I had journeyed with, many of the people in this group had volunteered, had gone through some terrible, terrible experiences in their life. Things by which one would assume are unforgivable. How would you get past that? How would you get over it? How would you forgive the person who did that to you? So your intention, or the intention that was being offered, was, okay, you had reached this point in your journey. Ask Mother Ayahuasca, how do I forgive? How can I forgive the unforgivable? The offering progresses, the line dwindles. It's my time to stand up. It's my time to actually go and get my first cup of yahe. I do so. I offer my intention to the shaman and to the ayahuasca itself. Help me forgive the unforgivable. I drink the cup. I go and I sit back down on my bed. On every other journey, as I've explained in these other podcasts, as you begin to sit with Mother Ayahuasca, you lose track of time. You don't have a very good sense of the progression of time. This evening, for me in particular, it was different. I recognized very quickly, yahe's the anvil. Yahe's the hard hitter. I felt like immediately tripping my balls off. And I mean tripping my balls off in an escalated way that I had not yet reached on the other 3 nights. I recall specifically that people were still milling about in the Maloka, that nothing had settled, that some people had already gone back up to the shaman, perhaps in the same mindset, in the same vibration that I was, not yet having their first cup of yahe, of ayahuasca. They had the same reluctance that I did and were waiting for the line to not dwindle, but to be gone, for them to be able to approach the shaman and perhaps have a more personal interaction prior to taking the ayahuasca. This is at least what I felt or I observed was going on in that moment, because I was tripping my balls off. Because this hit me so hard so fast, I was immediately put back on my heels. I was not in a confident, in an optimistic frame of mind. It was challenging, but I think that's a tame way of framing it, of putting it. I was freaking out. I felt myself start freaking out. Immediately, I went into my breath. I've got to stay in my breath and become super present. This I was able to do. Unfortunately, that had its limitations, and I began to sweat. Again, quick recap. If there's a mathematical equation of ayahuasca, ayahuasca equals purge. You are going to purge in some capacity. I, for my part, did not vomit. It came out the other way. But, as has been discussed in prior podcasts, purging is not limited to defecation or vomiting. Some people begin crying, uncontrollably crying. Some people begin laughing, uncontrollably laughing. Some people might actually sweat, and I mean sweat. I began to sweat, and I mean sweat. I lied down on my bed, and I began to sweat. I began to sweat so hard that I soon realized that I was lying in a pool of sweat on this single wide bed, on this very thin mattress. I had sweat straight into it. It was no longer a comfortable environment. I had to get up. I had to get out of there. It was that uncomfortable. I thought, I'll go outside, I'll cool off, I'll be able to come back inside, lie back down. Side note, yes, I was in Costa Rica, a highly tropical climate, in the jungle. This was not a well thought out plan. But it was the plan nonetheless. I went outside, and lo and behold, because we're in a highly tropical climate, because we're in the jungle, I did not cool down. I continued to sweat, and I continued in what I felt like was an escalating trip. I felt like not only was I tripping my balls off, but it was escalating to a higher degree, a higher level with every breath that I took.
Having failed in the let's go outside and cool off plan, I did go back inside and I lied back down on that sweat-soaked bed. Here, I had lost all concept of time because when I came to, when I felt like I was present, I had one of the shaman, a Sha woman, to be clear, fanning me because she recognized how badly I was sweating in the midst of 45 other people lying in this maloka during this ceremony. Another recap. Recall, dear listener, that you cannot drink or eat anything after you have ingested ayahuasca. So when you are sweating to the point that I was sweating, where you were probably losing many of the necessary fluids, particularly electrolytes, you would love to have some water. One of the things that I actually wrote down in my journal, and we're going to get to all of the things that I wrote down, but one of the things that I wrote down in my journal on this evening is the desperation for water, how precious water really is. When you need a drink of water and you can't take one, it is one of the most desperate feelings you will ever experience. I got up out of that bed in that state of mind and went back outside, and something started to happen in that desperation. I knew that I couldn't drink any water. I recognized how hard I was sweating. I had this feeling I was dying. I'm dying. This is what it feels like to die. I went right back into this mode, into this vibration of freaking out, because this was how it feels to die. I'm dying. As I am thinking this, as I am realizing this to the extent that I'm actually realizing something, I can't explain it, but I started to trip even harder. I almost felt like a part of me, my soul, my essence, wanted to leave my body, and I was not letting it happen. I don't know how long this went on for. Again, no concept of time. But I actually approached one of the shaman in this state, and I said, I think I'm losing it. I think I'm dying. I need you to bring me back. I specifically said this to the man. He looked at me, didn't miss a beat, said, go sit down over here. Took me to a place outside, sat me down, went through this ceremony with me to try to help calm me down, to try to help identify where I was in my journey, this vibration that I was in. And he said something very strange to me. He said, you need to sit with your ancestors. You need to ask them for help to make it through this journey. Now, as I have said in prior podcasts, as you have heard in many of my pithy diatribes on social issues, on sports, on politics, I am not much of a superstitious person, and it took me aback that I had to, quote unquote, sit with my ancestors and ask them for help to make it through this journey. But given the way I felt, and again, I was dying. I was in this vibration of death. I actually at one point thought this must be what people feel like right before they actually die. This level of pain, this level of suffering, but also this tripping, this actual vibration where it feels like your soul is about to leave your body, your essence about to leave your body. So I'm not in a position where I'm going to question any advice. If the direction is go sit with ancestors, ask them for help, I'm going to sit with the ancestors, I'm going to ask them for help. That is precisely what I did. And what happened? Immediately, I felt this weight on my shoulders. I felt like there was 1,000 years of pain, of suffering, of disappointment, of anger, of jealousy, of shame, all flowing through my blood. So what did I have? What resources did I have? I asked, I need your help. And it was just a simple breathe. Just breathe. I can't recall if I heard it or if I felt it or if I just knew it.
It was breathe. And I wasn't just breathing. I was taking in extremely deep breaths. I was expelling deep breath. Couldn't give you a time, couldn't tell you how long this went on, but I felt this anger, this pain, suffering, disappointment, shame, jealousy. I felt it dissipate as I breathed in deeply and breathed out deeply. I actually began to feel better. I felt like I was helping 1,000 years of ancestral lineage expel all of these negative emotions that had been felt, that had occurred over these lifetimes. Once I began to feel better, I felt accomplished, and I thought to myself, let's go and lie down. Went back to the sweat-soaked bed. That wasn't going to do. They had some extra mattresses in one part of this building, this Maloka. I went and I got a fresh mattress and I put it outside. I arranged it. It was in a nice quiet little area. I went and I laid down. Time for me to give myself the proverbial pat on the back. I need some rest. Couldn't tell you how long it was because I have no concept of time. I'm still tripping my balls off. I didn't have but maybe 2 or 3 winks of rest before I felt it all come back. I was sweating. I felt this vibration of death, that I was dying. It was escalating. It wasn't descending. It was escalating. I couldn't just lay there. I had to get up. I was compelled to get up. Now, by way of some of the incidents that I can recall happening, I was up and pacing for quite some time. I saw other people who were in the ceremony come out of the building in their own journey, walking around on their own accord, and walk around for what I felt like was a considerable amount of time and go back in. I witnessed this happen with several people. I never went back in. I had not stopped pacing around. I had not stopped trying to reconcile where I was in this journey. The pain, this feeling of death, it got so bad. It escalated to such a point. It was different from what I had felt prior to. Note, I reached out to a shaman in that state. It was so bad. It had escalated in a point prior to what I had felt before that I did not know what I was going to do. I actually had in my head, will this ever end? I don't know the source. I don't know the origin. I just know that it happened. A voice in my head that said, you're going to have to kill yourself to stop this. Let me repeat. You're going to have to kill yourself to stop this. If you want to stop dying, you're just going to have to kill yourself in this plane of existence. Oh, that didn't go over well. Now I really start to freak out because I don't know where that came from, but when I heard it, when I began to debate it, it made sense. If you want to stop dying, you're going to have to kill yourself in this plane of existence. So here I am outside of this Maloka, this building in the middle of Costa Rica, tripping my balls off, sweating like I had just run the Boston Marathon. And I can now identify with any of these homeless people walking around the block, blathering on incoherently. I was that guy. Although I don't think I was blathering incoherently, spoiler alert, but I began to openly debate with myself whether or not I was going to kill myself. In this fervor, in this frenzy, one of the shaman, happened to be a woman, noticed that I was not in a good place. I can state without equivocation that she was a miracle. She saved my life. She came to me at the precise, perfect moment. She asked me what was going on, and I was very frank with her. I think I'm getting called to kill myself. Took me over to an area of the building, sat me down, said I'm going to be right back. Came back, she had many of the implements that the shaman have, They have these feathers. They have these oils that they rub on you. She goes to work. When she completes this process, she puts her hands on me. Very calm, very gentle. And then she says, explain to me what's going on. I do explain. She's still got her hands on me. And she says, your ego is dying. This is the death of your ego. And your ego does not want to relent. Your ego does not want to relinquish its place in your life. In what I now understand was exposition to assure me, to educate me, to enlighten me. This woman explained that many people journey for this specific opportunity, that I was very lucky. This was a very exciting time for me. The death of one's ego. For my part, I countered, I don't find this exciting at all. Let me tell you what's exciting. The New York Metropolitans winning 95 games and going to the World Series. That's exciting. Hey, look, I got 5 of the 6 Powerball numbers right. That's $1 million. That's exciting. Sweating my balls off in a Costa Rican jungle, high on ayahuasca, thinking that I'm going to die and that the only way I can stop dying is killing myself. Well, I don't know if I'd qualify that as exciting. She assured me it was exciting nonetheless. And what was the issue? The issue was my resistance. My ego was dying. Mother Ayahuasca wasn't going to take no for an answer. I was resisting. My ego was resisting. And therefore, I was going through one of the worst experiences of my entire life. It was very likely my ego that was saying, I'm not going to be sacrificed. If I go, you go. You're going to kill yourself. So I had to resign myself to the fact that I have to lower my resistance and let my ego die. I went back to the little makeshift area that I had created for myself, and I lied down, and I basically professed to the Creator, to my superconscious self, I am available, I am willing, I do not want to offer any more resistance, I'll let my ego die. A curious feeling came over me. It hit me that I had purged for hours by sweating, but I had not yet purged in any capacity other than that. I had not yet vomited, although I did not vomit for the entire trip, spoiler alert, and I had not yet defecated. And the urge to defecate hit me, and it hit me quickly, and just like the anvil that Yahweh was, the urge to defecate hit me like that anvil. As I sat on the porcelain throne, providing my offerings, I slowly felt myself coming down. I slowly felt myself calming down. And a little voice in the back of my head goes off, you were really going to kill yourself, weren't you? You legitimately debated killing yourself. And sitting there, now becoming more lucid, now becoming more aware, I realized, yes, that's the God's honest truth. I seriously debated this. It was a legitimate consideration. Do you forgive yourself? You tricky Mother Ayahuasca, you. Do I forgive myself? Yes. Yes, I do. I forgive myself for offering all the resistance. I forgive myself for the lack of trust. I forgive myself for wanting a solution, an easy way out, rather than having faith in the journey. Yes, I forgive myself. Then you can forgive the unforgivable, because it is in these emotions, it is in these vibrations, it is in these moments that people do the things that they do. Holy shit. The anger, the fear, the isolation, the guilt, the shame, these layers of ego that provide this resistance, that provide this separation,
people are rarely acting with true intent, with true malice. You may be, dear listener, the object of these actions by other people, motivated by these negative emotions, but the fact of the matter is, it has nothing to do with you. The little light in my head was on and it wasn't coming off. I felt a sense of peace and serenity, and I felt tired. I felt like I could go and sleep. Now, I went back to the bed. This cycle, lying down, almost falling asleep, feeling the urge, I'll just put it to you that way, feeling the urge to get up and go back to the porcelain throne. This cycle went on several iterations. I don't know how long that progressed, but by the time I no longer felt those urges, I was ready to sleep, and I did so. But to give you an idea of where I was at in my journey and how long it took, when I was able to close my eyes, I could see the breach of light from the sun rising. I could probably go on to the Google machine and find out on that day what time the sun rose, but it had to be in the 5 a.m. range. I don't know how long I slept, but it couldn't have been that long. I actually leaned forward from my prone position sleeping and noted that the sun had not yet fully risen over the horizon. I was watching the sun rise. Once completed, I pulled out my notebook and furiously began scribbling notes. To recap, my tripping balls script is not great. Now, many of these notes are just for me, but the gist of it is very simple. You don't have to be afraid, and you don't have to control everything. Enjoy the process. Focus on the present, and don't worry about the outcome. I can tell you that sitting here right now recording this podcast, that has been the hardest lesson to integrate into me coming back to what I would call the world, my life. You don't have to control everything. You don't have to worry about the outcome. Just enjoy the process. Easier said than done, but like anything else, it is something that we can all accomplish. I'll read you the last thing that I wrote because it is for me quite prophetic, and it is for me another of the most difficult things that I'm integrating into what I'll call this life. Everyone just wants to be loved. Look at any person. Look at that person and see a child seeking love. A person that wants to feel love from others. That wants to love and be loved. That's the last thing I wrote in this notebook. That's it. That's pretty much the secret to life. Whether a scientist, a biologist, a theologian, it doesn't matter. Yes, we are here to procreate. We are here to propagate, to promote the species, if you will. But in service of what? Pop culture? Consumerism? You have children. What do you want to teach them? Love. You have parents. What do you want from them? Love. You have this family. What do you want to give to them? Love. We do not, and I am particularly guilty of as much, we do not love one another. I come back home, I'm subjected to as much pop culture and consumerism and electronic dance music than any three of you combined. So it's very easy for me to get out of the vibration of love. But as I look at that 26-year-old girl in a Hermes belt and a Louis Vuitton purse, bouncing up and down to the EDM, I reflect, what does she really want? What she really wants is to be loved. What she really wants is to feel love. What she really wants is to give love. So maybe I'm in the perfect place. Maybe that's why I'm here, and maybe that's why I went through what I went through, because this is all a test of whether or not, as someone who considers himself to be enlightened, considers himself to have been
provided a crash course in wisdom, can I demonstrate as much in action? I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I'm going to enjoy the process. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.